And welcome back. Now, if the unions in South Africa were to be done away with and replaced by, say, a neoliberal program, the social costs would be devastating. These are the comments from Vashna Jagarnath from the Socialists Revolutionary Workers Party. And this comment forms part of the debate as to whether trade unions still fight for a living wage and opportunities for retrenchments, and whether they are responsible for the country's economic crisis, or whether the ruling party and other capitalists are the reason. So with us now to discuss the role and what unions actually do and what sort of contributions we expect them to make in this depressed economy. We are joined by Andrew Chirwa, who's from the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, that's NUMSA, and we also have Head of Strategic Engagement at the Institute for Race Relations, Sara, and the General Secretary of Solidarity Trade Union, Gideon de Plessis. Thanks so much to all of you for coming through. Let's just start with identifying the role and the function of unions. Sara, let me take you there.
The role of unions is to support their membership, try to improve their conditions of employment, and perhaps if they have the capacity to provide other services. It could be insurance, it could be legal advice, it could be a range of things. That is their role. And interestingly enough, the whole concept of unionism arose in a capitalist environment. But essentially, unionism and unions are formed by people who choose to form them, and their members are people who choose to become members, and that's what a free society is about. And
before I engage Gideon and Andrew, do you think that if we look at the role of unions in the South African landscape, contemporary South Africa, are they fulfilling that role, and are they doing so effectively?
Well, unionism is a very strategic profession, shall I put it that way, to be involved with. And you have to, in my mind, adapt as things change. I say that from the perspective of having spent originally nearly 20 years in industrial relations and labour law, and seen the extent to which unionism has changed, ideological differences, ideological changes, but they have to change with the times. And unfortunately, times require different responses. And that's really is being alert, in the same way that any business or anyone who wants to start a business has to make sure that they're operating optimally in the environment they're in. Otherwise, they might go under because they no longer serve the need.
And case in point, we see what's happening at SAA at the moment. We look at what's happening at other state-owned entities, but just, across, the South African spectrum and the roles that union play. Andrew, you, of course, I would imagine would be in agreement with the sentiments that are expressed in our opening there. But talk to us about where you see unions playing a role, and whether you think you are doing a good job as a union federation.
Look, essentially, trade union movement are actually a collective voice of workers to respond. So they are a responsive organization, especially for the fact that we live in a capitalist society where the rate of exploitation continue to grow, and as a result, workers had to defend their status at work. Workers has to make gains, and for workers to best make gains and respond to the capitalist exploitation, they have to unionize. So the role of unions will continue. The union will continue to change, of course, its nature, its character, especially now as we speak. I mean, for the fact that we're now in the highest stage of capitalism, which is imperialism, we're now talking about fourth industrial revolution, we're now talking about digitalization. All these things signal to one thing, to the fact that the rate of inequalities is likely to continue to grow as technological development continues to change all the time. So workers have no choice but to continue to defend and fight for their status, because some of these changes we're talking about are, of course, a threat to the livelihood of workers. So I'm more than convinced that whilst we've got challenges within the trade union movement, but I'm more than convinced that the existence and the relevance of trade union movement will never go away. Actually, if you look at in our South African landscapes, you could look at the role of the union that the unions played under the struggle during apartheid days. The union, as well as they represent workers at the point of production, they also have got a role to ensure that there's social development. They also have a role to ensure that there's transformation. Actually, just imagine South Africa without trade union now as to what would have happened if there were no trade unions. So I'm simply making an argument that if the capitalist system was not exploitative, we would not have unions. But unions has to be there because there ought to be response. There's no capitalist who's actually, who's so good that is prepared to ensure that workers' issues are addressed. There's no discrimination. When wealth is generated, it's shared amongst workers. If that is, in fact, I'm simply making an argument that those who don't like, who hate unions, they must simply just do things. Ensure that workers' rights are defended, pay your workers properly, you will see that there's no problem with unions. And that's why we say this, because most of the time we talk simply because of there's one strike there's two strikes there. The successes that trade unions actually register together with the industry, less is talked about that. So there's a big role that unions play. We provide stability, the stability in the country. Because trade unions are there negotiating on behalf of workers.
The reality is, though, that union membership is decreasing. Younger people seemingly are not, finding the need to affiliate to unions. And that's a question that the unions need to answer. Why is it that you're not appealing to younger, and some would argue more with it, people in society at the moment? And also, if what Andrew is saying is true, why aren't we seeing more solidarity amongst unions more of the time? Gideon?
Sakina, first of all, just to add on to what Andrew said, if you have, those are certain workplaces where we're not unionized, and then you can see there's a reason for it. The workers don't need a union in the way that if you look at their conditions of employment, if you look at the work culture. But then the majority of our members, when they join us, and the surveys that we've done, they join us for two reasons. One is protection. We like an insurance policy because you've got grievances, dismissals, retrenchments, liquidations, business rescue practices, where you definitely cannot fight those battles without a trade union. Then secondly, we want to offer a cradle-to-grave offer to our members, and that's where we attract the youth as well, where we say, but you get your workplace protection, but we also have education opportunities through the trade union. We also have our financial services where we render without a profit margin. We render certain financial services. We give guidance to students regarding career progression. We do many things, for our members as South African citizens. So if we have a member, we don't regard them as an employee. We regard them as a South African citizen. And that is how we attract and retain members. But we have realized that it's all over the world to attract youth. It is a challenge all over. So as a result, we have now the cyber union, where we interact more through social media with our members, and they can react through social media, and that's very attractive to the youth. And we've also noticed, if you want to attract the youth, your service must be totally different. How to put a CV together, how to read your employment contract. Those are the kind of things we had to reposition.
So this cradle-to-grave offering that the unions purport to deliver to their members, one of the issues I have with unions is what I would call a lack of transparency very often with unions, especially when it comes to your finances, and taking your members along with everything that you do. Just the other day I was reading about Pop Crew, who have 100 million rand missing. Like, how does that happen? We're talking about a union here, and the amounts of money that unions actually collect from their members. Do members really benefit? Because this is not something one sees or hears of often, Sara. I'll take your comment first, because this for me has been a bugbear with unions and what they say they offer and what they actually offer to their members.
In this respect, unions are like any organizations that represent groups of people. And similar to government, similar to business, is if the temptations of corruption and maladministration take hold in a union, as they would in a government department or a company, the same thing will happen. The money will disappear, and the ability to really represent the members' best interests will diminish completely. But that's an aspect of human nature. It's really in the hands of the union leadership to manage properly, because that is their role, and therefore keep alive and have more than enough available to serve their members with. It's not, there's no specific issue with unionism in that regard.
But one would expect better. Before I come to you, Andrew, you were in negotiations with Sibanye yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. And what did you achieve through those consultations?
You see, that's exactly, when I got the message about the role of unions, and whilst we are sitting there, is when we realized, first of all, there was a business taken over by Sibanye. It was the old Lonmin mines, badly managed. They needed to retrench 5,000 workers. We ended up there, and the whole thing is there was union representation and non-union representation, and how the company merely bulldozed the process. They've got the streamlined process to get workers out before Christmas, and that's where we as a union had to step in and said, whoa, all you're doing, this is a tick box to put 2,000 odd people out in the street before Christmas. That's your aim from the start. And the non-union members were sitting there at one stage, and they started, just to allow us to start to talk on their behalf. And that's the thing, where I've seen how robust a process can be. If you have a company like Sibanye who really have got a robust approach, who really fast-track a process to put people out in the street, because it's all about profit. And that's the small element, ideologically I differ from Andrew maybe in many ways, but that's how I see where profit comes in to cut your overheads. That's like workers are a commodity. And that's where I found yesterday how important a trade union is, and especially if trade unions stick together in such a consultation.
Now, that part, looking at SAA as you respond to the previous question and what's happening there, SAA management have made it very clear they simply do not have the money. They cannot afford the increases, even the ones that they are offering. They don't have that money. So the unions say, come hell or high water, what you are offering us, we will not accept, because we feel it's too little, and we want more, in spite of the fact that the financial situation of that entity. Talk to us about the role that you're playing there now.
Oh, you see, one thing for sure is that we reasonable people, as we represent workers, and if we believe that the demands of workers are genuine, would fight for those demands. What we refuse to do is for workers to be made scapegoat. When the airline has been bankrupted through corruption, through maladministration, through green contracts, which gives companies like Swissport, Bit Air, huge amounts of billions, which we think it's unnecessary. And with all these things happening, workers are expected to understand the financial situation and pull back. We think it's unfair. Workers are human beings. Workers have got needs as well that they must be met. Workers need to live a decent life. And we've engaged around all these issues. And that's why we've moderated our demands. We've now moved from where we were. We now simply say to SAA, at least meet workers halfway and at least give them 8%. They are refusing to do that. They say workers must shoulder the mess of the SAA. We think that that cannot be correct, that workers are expected to do that. I want to say on the earlier point about young people and the trade union movement that you were talking about. There is a contest between classes, because the society is divided between classes. If it was through the wishes of the capitalist class, trade union movement should be liquidated and not exist. Because many of them hate to deal with trade unions, hate to be held or to be told that they must account, because they don't account. They don't want to account. And what does the trade union movement do? The role of a trade union is to ensure that there's accountability, to ensure that workers' rights are respected. Many in the industry don't want that. They want to run the show on their own. So the point I'm making is that the young people you talk about are also a subject for contestation. And many of them are being taught, and that's why during strike we get so worried when the workers' demand are ignored. And all what in the media is spoken about is how workers are unreasonable, look at the damage they are causing to the airline and all that. We also interested to ensure that we save the airline.
But that there are two sides to the story, and nobody is diminishing your demands. And as a worker, I would never say that you are wrong in terms of demanding a living wage and an increase every year, because if you don't give people an increase, increase, they become poorer every year. But the point of the matter in the SAA situation is that it doesn't have money. I work for the SABC. SABC doesn't have money. Should trade unions in instances like these play a different sort of role, Sara?
The role of trade unions is the same, but what is different is the strategic approach to it. Now, the problem for me with the SAA strike is that there is no money, and Andrew's absolutely right. It's the history of corruption and maladministration is absolutely too ghastly to contemplate. And in that respect, yes, anyone who's still employed at SAA is likely to have to pay for the mistakes of SAA. The problem is, because things are so desperate, your shareholder, which is essentially the rest of the country, because everybody's taxes of every kind go into supporting the SAA, the constant bailing out of a bad organisation, the sympathy that may very often follow the union in a set of demands against a company is very, very low in this instance. People are very torn between, well, you know, they may deserve an increase or not, but it doesn't matter. The more important thing in the circumstances is somehow, more than anything, because the airline looks destined to go in, is to try and save as many jobs as possible, and if possible, if it's taken over or bought out in some way, have agreements to transfer those skills. That's happened. Certainly in the last 30 or 40 years, that's happened on occasion.
Isn't what you are saying now partly a function of how trade unions have also been characterized, as sometimes troublemakers and therefore people who are always looking for unrealistic demands. And even in a case where here they are making a fundamental point about how this institution has been run into the ground by people who, by the way, have still not been sanctioned. And yet it is ordinary workers on the shop floor who have to pay the price for that.
So one of the things I've seen happen in my personal experience from a professional point of view is, and particularly with an environment, say like SAA, where you probably have a vast number of either unnecessary managers, incompetent managers, dishonest managers, that in retrenchment negotiations, there you can really try to make the case that it's not the workforce at the trade union represented level that should be retrenched. It's a whole raft of useless managers. And that's the interesting thing I've seen that happen, is that invariably you can get rid of, say, a much fewer number of managers, but the financial saving is as good as, if not better, than retrenching a whole lot of people on the shop floor.
Just make one point, Shakina, on this question of money and the SAA.
Yes.
And the point you're making about SABC, whether it's SAA, whether it's ESCOM, the bottom line is that for many years we've been told the same story. There's never been money. I don't recall a stage where there was money. But all the years, as unions, we've understood and negotiated and ensured that there's settlement. Actually, this is for the first time that we end up in this crisis that we now fighting to get out of.
Could it be it's for the first time that the coffers are really, really empty, and previously perhaps they were pleading poverty in order to try and minimize?
Yes, I think the problem is that we've reached a point, and let's call it a breaking point, where there is a very near looming ratings downgrade to junk. So the pressure for management, pressure for government has changed. And it's those sorts of things that may suddenly change a history, a pattern of action.
And Gideon, in this instance, looking at what's happening in SAA, and this is the solidarity I was talking about, what is your view on what's happening at SAA, and what sort of membership do you have there, and what are your views? Should you be in solidarity with what NUMSA, for example, is demanding?
Yeah, see, the first instance, we work side by side with NUMSA, but we have, in inverted commas, the advantage. We represent your artisans and your skilled workers, where NUMSA represent more the precarious workers or the vulnerable workers who literally live from hand to mouth, who sit with the situation. The only time they can improve their lives and livelihood is through wage negotiation. And in the end, there was a secret ballot, and the workers gave the mandate to NUMSA and SACA to go out on strike. So this is a bottom-up approach where the employees of the company, remember, it's not, we're talking about union members, but they are employees of SAA, and they said we want to go on strike, and as a union you have to honor it. For solidarity, obviously, you know, you sit with a difficult situation. I can look at it from NUMSA's point of view and understand that. On the other hand, our members said no, we don't want to go on strike, so we don't have that mandate to go on strike. But there needs to be a serious intervention, and be that business rescue, whatever. But what you need to do is to avoid a liquidation process, because then everybody lose, and there can be no winners. And we are concerned about the first liquidation application to hit. So there needs to be a serious intervention to save. For us, from a union point of view, save the jobs, but also there's a downstream through SAA, so more people will be affected than only SAA workers.
And we keep hearing people saying that, you know, everybody needs to be part of the solution. And you've just highlighted, you know, the juxtaposition of what we're dealing with at not just an SAA, but I suppose in any sort of entity of this kind across the country, because your work, your members who are workers who are more skilled, probably, if it could be those who have the advantage of evergreen contracts, where they got an increase, whereas the workers that Andrew represents didn't get an increase. And those things cannot be right. You cannot have one organization who says, okay, but I must also, in their defense, say they were taken to court in this regard to pay the 5.9% to the pilots. But even so, you can't have one organization who have a certain set of contracts with a certain part of its workforce where they get increases and another part that doesn't. Surely that means that you guys ought to talk a little more and take a better offer to the employer that seeks for more equitable distribution of whatever resources the employer does have to distribute.
Now, maybe a short comment, Sakina, and I'm sure Andrew would like to add to it. But for us, we have been in these situations where the top management takes a pay cut. They first say no bonus, no incentive. They take a pay cut, and the next moment they put us in a much better position to go back to our members. In this case, it didn't happen. They all hang on to their big salaries and all the perks that goes with it. So they are also sending out the wrong message.
We're out of time, but you see, that's part of the problem. How do you pay bonuses to executives at institutions that are so deep in the red and in need of bailout?
You don't.
The mind boggles. But we have to leave it there, unfortunately. Thank you so much to our guest this morning for talking to us about what's been happening across the landscape in South Africa, where we're seeing a raft of retrenchments taking place, and of course looking at the roles that unions play in this regard. Gideon du Plessis, Sara, and Andrew Chirwa, our guest this morning. Thank you so much for engaging us. Let's bring you the news at 8.